Hey guys, so I wanted to do a quick video about currying. Now, currying is a concept that comes from functional programming, but it's used a lot in JavaScript. I've seen that being used across different libraries, and also a lot of interviewers ask about it, especially for mid-level positions. So it's nice to know. To be fair, I personally don't use it a lot, but it comes with a syntax that is kind of really specific, and once you learn it you cannot forget it, so it's nice to know, right? So the idea of currying is to transform a function that receives multiple arguments into a sequence of functions that receive just one argument, right? That is, you have a function that receives more than one argument and you break it down into smaller chunks of function that receive just one argument. I'll give you guys an example of that. So let's say that you have a function that sums three numbers, 1, number 2, and number 3, and we return the sum of it, number 2 plus number 3, right? If I console log it, let's use 1, 2, and 3. So that will give us 6, right? 1 plus 2 plus 3, that's 6, right? So a pretty straightforward function. We just sum three numbers, simple enough, right? If we curry that function, what we'll have to do is break it down into smaller chunks of function, as I said. So we would have, let me call it sum curry, and we will receive just number 1. Let me use function for now, the number 2, and then we return number 3. Now these are anonymous functions, right? We need a way to break it down, and we return the sum of these three guys here. I also need to return that as a function, and then what we can do is just call sum curry. The difference is that, as you see here on the sum, we receive the arguments to just one of the functions, right? We just have one function that receives 3 arguments. Now we have 3 functions, so we need to call it as a function, basically. So we'll have 1 plus 2 plus 3, but that's 3 different functions, right? We are returning 3 functions here. We have one function here which returns 3 functions. So if I do that, we will see that we have 6 here. So that's how we would curry the sum function. Now you may be thinking that, right, but this syntax is weird, I don't like it, and I also don't like it. So what we can do, and what you will normally see on the JavaScript land, is that people will do things like they use arrow function. So sum curry arrow, we receive number 1, we receive number 2, and we receive number 3, and we return the sum of it. So that's normally what you would see when working with JavaScript, right? So we can do it, we can call it, and we would have 1 plus 2 plus 3. Let me call it sum curry arrow, and you will see that we receive the same result. Now you may be thinking again, right, so I understand it, but I don't see the use of it. Now one thing that we can do is fix parameters. We can fix the arguments in a way that we can reuse them later. So for example, we can do something, let me remove all of them and just keep the curry one and call it sum. So what we can do is something like sum 5, and what we can do then is call sum, and then we fix the first number. So we'll sum num2 and num3, we will always sum them with num1, which is 5, right? So we can just call it here, and then let's call, let's pass 5 and 2 and 3. So let me call it sum 5, and that will give us 13, right? 5 plus 5 plus 3, 13, right? And we can go deeper and do something like sum 15, and then we call sum 5, passing down 10, right? And that will give us 15, which if we use it will give us, if we use 5, that will give us 20, right? So that's the basic idea of curry, right? You can fix parameters, you can reuse them later, but I want to give you guys another example that I have seen being used across some libraries, and also some other coders that I've seen use it. So let's say that you have a list of books, right? You have an ID and a name. So for example, we can have Harry Potter here, and then we can have 1984, and we can have Lord of the Rings, right? ID 3, right? So let's say that you want to find the book that has the ID equal to 1. Normally, what we do is we use the normal array helper that we have on JavaScript, right? Books.find, and then what we can do is receive the book, where the book, the ID of the book is equal to 1, right? So if I print it, book with ID 1, what we have is Harry Potter, right? It has the ID 1. We can do the same, for example, for the ID 2, right? It works as expected. 1984. So what we can do is do something like const with, we normally call them, I've seen them being called with at the start, like as a prefix, with ID. And what we can do is receive the ID of the book that we want, right? And then we can receive the book, and then we return the book.id equals to ID, right? So that's the idea. We can call with ID 2 here, and you will see that it works as expected. So we abstracted this logic here into something more reusable, and we can do the same thing for the name, right? It's the same thing, but instead of ID, we receive the name. And we can do something like book with name Lord of the Rings. So, right. So that's the idea, right? You can see that the code is much more cleaner, and you can see that we can just do books.find with ID 3, or books.find with ID 2, or books.find with name Lord of the Rings. The code gets much more readable and also reusable. So that's the idea. As an last example, if I go into the documentation of Redux, you can see that they use it a lot. For example, here, especially in the middleware section, you can see that, for example, we have loggers here. You can see the syntax here, that weird syntax that we have seen. It uses that syntax across all the middlewares. So just to give you guys the example there and show you that this is actually used, you know, in production or like in the real world. So that's why it's interesting to know it. So that's it, guys. That's all I had to show you. Have a good one. That's it.